Hello and welcome to another episode of Masala History. My name is Siva. I try to bring interesting histories from all around the world, back them up with historical research, and present them for easy consumption. Please continue to send comments and feedback so that together we can make history cool. If you want to learn more such stories, feel free to visit my webpage at fb.me/masalahistory by Siva or my Instagram page at the handle Masala History. And with that, let's jump into today's episode. The COVID-19 pandemic has thrown lives of many people into disarray across the world. Sadly, in India, the migrant worker communities have become refugees in their own country. As we continue to grapple with the situation and come to terms with how to rebuild the lives of those affected by this calamity, it will be timely to see how, several decades back, this country and one of its kings welcomed with open arms refugees from a different nation and created a home for them and not just a camp, while as a country we were ourselves dealing with drought and famine. The hero of our today's story is Digvijaysinghi Ranjitsinghji Jadeja of Nawanagar. Nawanagar is modern-day Jamnagar and located near Kolhapur in Maharashtra. Educated at University College in London, Digvijaysinghi signed up as second lieutenant at the British Imperial Army and served from 1919 all the way till 1931. He got continuously promoted while at the army. In fact, his military career formally ended only in 1947, and by that time he was promoted to lieutenant general. Of course, it was a honorary promotion nevertheless. He was India's delegate to the first session of the League of Nations, which, if you remember, started after World War I. He was also the deputy leader in the first delegation to the United Nations, which started after World War II. He was the president of the Board of Control of Cricket in India, BCCI, in the year 1937, one of its early years. In 1933, Digvijaysinghi succeeded Raja Ranjitsinghji, the illustrious cricketer, as the Maharaja Jam Saheb of Nawanagar. He served as a Raj Pramukh post the Indian independence. That's what most of the erstwhile Indian princes did. And he was a Raj Pramukh until that position was abolished in 1956 across the country. However, the important thing is this is not why we are making a podcast about Ranjitsinghji. It's not because he was a BCCI president, not because he was a Maharaja of Nawanagar, not because he was a important diplomat for India in many, many cases. On 1st September 1939, the first shot of the Second World War was formally fired. Adolf Hitler's Wehrmacht marched into Poland. Unlike World War I, where all the key players in Europe jumped into war within a week of the first shot fired, in the Second World War it was a drag before multiple European nations would show up on battlefields. The war spread slowly all over Europe and took its first peak when Adolf Hitler decided to invade USSR. This was called Operation Barbarossa. Poland was stuck in the middle, as both Germany and Russia wanted pieces of Poland for themselves. In fact, just before the Second World War, Hitler and Stalin had signed a pact that would enable them to divide Poland. Long story short, what this essentially meant was that the civilian community in the country was terribly affected by the war. The government was in exile. Most Polish civilians, especially the able-bodied men and women, were held captive in concentration camps, and millions of children were left as orphans. In 1942, several hundred children and few women, most of them who were orphans, left the Polish shores in multiple smaller ships, hoping for refuge in some friendly country. There are conflicting reports on how these kids made their escape. It is possible that they escaped from a Siberian gulag. It is also possible that they were consciously sent away by USSR as part of an amnesty they had granted to 50,000 people. It's not fully clear as to where these kids fall under. However, the fact was that in no country the kids were welcome. And this was not just in Europe where the war was raging, it was even in Africa and Arabia. Eventually, after trying multiple ports with zero success, The ships docked at Bombay and sought help, and their hope was that because the British government had promised Poland support if there was a war, they assumed that they were going to be given entry into Bombay as it was controlled by the British. The governor of Bombay, a civil servant of the British India administration, refused them entry, citing that he did not have the necessary authority to let foreigners come, especially from an enemy country. During this time, Digvijaysinghi was a member of Imperial War Cabinet under Winston Churchill. By chance, he met with the exiled Prime Minister of Poland, who mentioned the plight of these children who were refugees in ships. Digvijaysinghi swung into action immediately, flew into Bombay, and directly went to the harbour to see the ships. He was appalled to see the inhuman conditions that these children were subject to. On the same day, he met the governor of Bombay to persuade him to allow them refuge. The governor did not budge, claimed that he needed instructions from Downing Street, without which he could do nothing. The Jam Saheb was furious. He went back to the harbour and told the captains of the ships to dock at Rossi, which was a port that fell under his Nawanagar province. When the ships anchored there, he personally welcomed all the 600 children and 40 women with open arms, saying that you are not a refugee here, you are Navanagarians and this is your home. Of course, the British administration in India was very furious and embarrassed as well. The Maharaja was reprimanded by the Viceroy office in Delhi for this act. Being under the protection of the British army, he was actually pushed to put these refugees back in ships and send them away. But the king would not bow to these threats. He went on record that he considered each of these people to be his own family and asked how could he be expected to abandon his family. To prove a point, he went one step further and issued adoption certificates to every one of the Polish folks who actually landed on his province. He personally funded from his pocket the entire setup of interim tents and then a proper housing camp for all these people at his private resort in Balachadi. By the time the Polish were ready to go home 4.5 years later in 1946, about 1,040 children had made Nawanagar their home. The Maharaja was very clear that none of the people who were in this camp were to be treated like refugees. He is known to have said in an interview to Polska, a Polish weekly magazine, that maybe there in the beautiful hills beside the seashore, the children will be able to recover their health and forget the ordeal that they went through. And he didn't offer just lip service like this. He walked the walk. He brought chefs from Goa to cook European-style food at the camp so that the children feel home. He was particular that they be treated with dignity. And so the kids under 17 were all taught in Polish medium. Everyone was free to practice their own religion, and every Polish festival was celebrated with the Raja in attendance. More importantly, the Balachadi camp was the only place in the entire world where a Polish flag was hoisted every single day from 1942 until Poland was actually freed in 1945. The Maharaja was very attached to the children. He called himself their Bapu, or father. He raised funds through his influence to support the camp, and every year the children were invited for Christmas parties with the Nawanagar royal family at their palaces. The Maharaja took a lot of personal risks against the British government to set up and run this camp. And especially when India dealt with one of the severe drought and famine in mid-1940s, in 1943 to be specific, the children were not considered as outsiders or an additional burden. They were considered as part of the local community and were extended the same rations and privileges as any of the citizens. Slowly, word spread across the world of the Jam Saheb's gesture and how he had set up a little Poland against all odds. This went on to inspire many others to open their hearts and homes to the innocent victims of war, not just in India, but across the world. It even caused the Viceroy of India to fund about 50,000 Indian rupees to the Polish Children Relief Fund, which at one point actually grew up to 600,000 or 6 lakh rupees. In 1946, once the World War II ended and the children were rehabilitated back to Poland by the United Nations, they proudly addressed Raja Digvijaysinghi as the Polish Maharaja Jam Saheb. His act of generosity is saluted even today in Poland, where he was posthumously awarded the Commander's Cross of the Order of Merit. There is a good Maharaja Square in Warsaw celebrating him. A couple of years back in 2018, few of the survivors from the Balachadi camp paid a visit to the very place where they lived and called as home for more than 4 years. It was an extremely highly emotional and nostalgic get together. There are many who love and hold fancy royal titles, but only a few, like the Maharaja Jam Saheb, Digvijaysinghi, Ranjitsinghji, Jadeja, who do complete justice to the spirit of this title by living to be a real one. While historians and political leaders refer to him as India's Schindler, I think I'm more convinced to call him as a true Maharaja of the people. When the world was fighting wars, when India was fighting for its independence from British oppression, when many Indians were fighting for survival against drought and famine, we lost several humans, but we did not lose our humanity. We welcomed foreign children with open arms and treated them as one of our own. Something for us not just to read about and be proud of and send forwards, but also to seriously think about in today's context and today's times. What are we going to do to protect people from becoming refugees in our own country? And with that, we come to the end of today's episode of Masala History. Send in your comments and feedback as always, and if you have a request for a specific topic, send in your comments and feedback. Stay safe and talk to you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.